Haunted's basically it's a storytelling magic show with a paranormal theme, and I grew up in Scotland with surrounded by castles and big houses, and they all had ghosts. We would always my mom would take us on tours through them, and there was always ghost stories. So I kind of grew up with ghost stories really, and so it always fascinated me. And when I was coming up with the idea for Haunted, I really wanted to try storytelling. I thought that storytelling, I've always loved stories, and so I wanted to see if I could tell stories. And so the idea really is that I collect these antiques or hauntiques, that they're objects that have a connection to the paranormal, and they're usually pretty old. And so I tell their story, and then strange things start to happen. The spookiest reaction I've had, I think, was one that I have a photograph, an old black and white photograph of a Victorian girl who probably lived about 150 years ago, and she's called Miranda. And I was performing in Adelaide at the Adelaide Fringe last year, and a woman in the audience just started freaking out, and she's pointing at the photograph, going, "That's my daughter." And everyone was kind of freaked out. I'm going, "Well, it can't be. This is 150 years old, this photograph." And she's going, "No, no, that is my daughter. That's my daughter." And yeah, we were all freaked out. I think it lends itself really well. The I think it's primarily it's a storytelling show. It's really I get a lot of feedback from audiences. They talk about the stories that they just that we love the stories. We thought they were great. And so I think it's nice that the objects are interesting because they're interesting to look at. I have a vampire hunting kit. We've got Harriet, our haunted doll, and so there's really interesting objects. And then the magic kind of feeds naturally into that because we're expecting strange things to happen. And I often find that after the show, people come up and they're taking photographs of all the objects. They love getting photographs with Harriet or the vampire hunting kit, or I've got a cemetery padlock, and they're fascinated by the objects themselves as well as the stories that they tell. I think they chose me. I do. I think we finished the show with a séance. We contact the spirit of this girl called Miranda who lived 150 years ago. And the objects that I use, I was in an antique store one day, and the woman, there's an old suitcase, and she opened it, and she was showing me these objects. There were inside it. There was an old bell, and there was Miranda, and there were some children's school slates, and they're all Miranda's story of things that she used when she was alive, and so we use those objects in the show to contact the spirit of Miranda, and most nights she makes an appearance. Oh, that's a tough one. I think the great thing. I think we all experience things all the time that we can't explain. I think we live in this day of technology now where all the information's at our fingertips. We can fact check things. We can find out what's going on the other side of the world. We have all this knowledge, but when it comes to the supernatural, and ghosts and spirits, or even UFOs or whatever is out there, we're not quite sure because we can't prove it and we can't disprove it. So we don't know. So I think there's a fascination now, even more so. I think that we have so much knowledge at our fingertips with that which can't be explained. So I think we're always, and maybe it's just a natural world. I don't know, but it's full of wonder. I mean, storytelling is as old. People were telling stories long before we had books, and there were people who would travel around villages, and they were the storyteller. They would tell stories and tell of the news of what was going on in the next village, and so we've always had stories. It goes right back to our basic human instincts, I think. So I think it's the story. I love the stories, and I think they do give a sense of wonder. Even when it's out of the context of a show like Haunted, I think storytelling's magic. I think stories are magic. I think you think of all the books that have been written over the years yeah, the stories are magic and full of wonder in themselves, I think. Do I believe in ghosts? I don't know. I don't, I haven't had a direct experience, I don't think, with a ghost that's, I have friends. I have friends who I trust implicitly. They're friends. They don't, I have a friend called Patrick, and he was staying in an old hotel one night, and he swears that an old woman came into his room with a shawl and sat on the edge of the bed and smiled at him, and then went out again. And he swears that happened. And he's a really rational guy. He's not a, I don't think he's a believer in ghosts, but he swears this happened. And people tell me all kinds of stories all the time. So I certainly can't say that I don't believe in ghosts. I think that people have their experiences, and whatever those experiences are, they're real for them. I guess it depends on the circumstance. If I'm in a cemetery, I'd probably run. If I'm in an old house by myself, I'd probably run. Yeah, I would like to think that I'd be calm, that I would be, try and communicate with it in some way, but I'd probably be freaked out and run. Absolutely, yeah. A lot of the stories I tell are from real life events. I have a vampire hunting kit, and with it I tell the story of the Highgate vampire. And the Highgate vampire, um, people claim, lived in Highgate Cemetery for many, many years, and there's many documentaries been made. People have seen sightings of the Highgate vampire, over quite a couple of hundred years. Even today, they still have sightings. And there was a vampire hunter called Sean Manchester, who was a bishop of the Old Catholic Church, and he's still alive today. He's got books and documentaries out on his life, and he claims that the Highgate vampire was that of a nobleman who had been brought from Eastern Europe and interred in the cemetery. And he in his books he talks about how he dispatched of the creature. So stories absolutely true. So I love telling that story. I love telling it because people can go and Google it. They can look at the documentaries on YouTube, and they can buy the books, and then so they can take a bit of the show home with them. I think there's been very few who have been proved to be real. There's been certainly a lot of fakery. A lot of magicians have spent their time debunking so-called psychics and mediums, and Harry Houdini was probably one of the most famous debunkers. His mother died, and he was very, very attached to his mother, and so he spent the years after her death visiting lots of spiritualists and mediums, trying to contact his mother on the other side. And he was determined to find out if they were true, and if they were, then he could contact his mother. And he didn't find one medium that he couldn't disprove. So he wrote a book called Amongst the Spirits, and where he debunked a lot of the famous spiritualists of the day. And magicians tend to have a knowledge of fake mediums' tricks. It's pretty common for magicians to even be better at recognizing things than scientists. Scientists are not the best people to consult when you're trying to find out if something's real or not. Yuri Geller is a great case. Yuri Geller, the scientists at Stanford University in America spent years studying Yuri Geller and giving him lots of tests to do. And they were absolutely convinced that he had real powers. But there's a guy called the Amazing Randy who was a great magician, but also a debunker of fakery, and he exposed Yuri Geller for what he was, a charlatan, and he wrote many books on that as well. And he found that the scientists were much easier to dupe than a magician. Well, I can try. In the show, we have a story about a haunted padlock, and the key for the haunted padlock. It's a story that took place with the gatekeeper, the original gatekeeper of Highgate Cemetery. But he one night woke up, and the moonlight coming in his window illuminated the key on his bedside table. And as he watched in horror, that key began to turn all by itself. as if opening a padlock. So there you go.